Now, obviously, the big news over the weekend, there was a terror attack, registered trademark Mossad, at a shopping mall, Israeli-owned, in Nairobi, Kenya. And the good news is all of the Israelis got out, and Israeli forces are there in charge of the situation. And this thing reeks of false flag, because Kenya is not Israel. And Israeli authorities really don't have jurisdiction there. But they swooped in. They were all around the airport fire at Kenya. Now they're all over the shopping mall, and they're basically in control. The Kenyan government is saying, yeah, these Israeli experts, they're taking the point on making sure that nobody comes out of there alive who doesn't support the official story. And we're seeing all these stories from all over the place about how everything that's happening there in Nairobi, it's Israelis in charge of this, Israelis in charge of that. And this reeks of being an Israeli false flag attack to demonize Muslims, just as Netanyahu pushes for war with Iran. You've got to go kill all them evil Muslims for us. Yet again, apparently AIPAC is in the fray, once again screaming that we, the United States, have to be prepared to use force against Iran. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting sick and tired of Israel always telling Americans to go kill Israel's enemies, because Israel is making enemies faster than the United States can kill them. It's a failed policy. So this standoff in the mall is continuing, and it's just getting a lot of coverage and a lot of drama. And to me, it's a replay of the Levant affair, where Israel carried out terror attacks in Egypt and planted false evidence to frame the Egyptian Muslims. Or the hijacking which led to the raid on Entebbe, which British intelligence revealed was actually set up by the Israeli intelligence service Shin Bet, again with an agenda to demonize Muslims and build sympathy for Israel, so that the world would say, yeah, go ahead and slap those Palestinians around. They deserve it. They're all evil people. And again, the timing is not a coincidence, as Netanyahu travels to the United Nations to scream about how the U.S. has to start bombing Iran. Inevitably, we're going to get a flurry of these so-called terror attacks that make the Muslims look bad and Israel look good. It's inevitable at this point. We see this coming out. There are so many bogus things about this. It feels to me like it's a prequel. Now remember, before 9/11, there was a bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Kenya. That was sort of the run-up. Oh, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, he bombed the Kenyan embassy, so we've got to watch out for him before he does something really bad in the United States, which, of course, happened on 9/11. I'm not the only person having doubts on this thing. There's an article over on the Rebel.org about that stupid Muslims killing all Christians at a mall story, pointing out that the mall is owned by Israelis. The SWAT team that showed up was from the Mossad. And just saying, it stands to reason this is another staged, orchestrated piece of theater to try and get the world hating the Muslims one more time. And history would bear that out. Now, probably if you're my age, you remember the name of a guy named Abu Nidal, who was supposed to be a Palestinian terrorist, and he just went on for a long time with dozens and dozens of bombings and assassinations, including he was the supposed mastermind of the Munich massacre at the 1972 Olympic Games. Yet all of his actions were harmful to the Palestinians' political ambitions, because everything he did made the Palestinians and Muslims look bad and built sympathy for Israel. And Yasser Arafat wanted nothing to do with him, and ultimately it came out where even his own close associates were convinced that Abu Nidal was actually working for the Mossad. Now remember what I said about terror. Nobody who is genuinely seeking socio-political change carries out acts that destroy popular support for their cause. You didn't see George Washington or Thomas Jefferson attacking colonial schools and churches during their campaign to force out the British. It would not work. Yet everything Abu Nidal did demonized Palestinians and built global sympathy for Israel. And so it's hardly surprising, looking back, that Abu Nidal's own people concluded that he must have been working for the Israelis. They're great at infiltrating and putting people into their rival organizations and then getting them to carry out attacks that make that organization look bad. Just like when the FBI infiltrated the anti-war movement and staged that riot at Disneyland to demonize the anti-war movement. It's an old trick. We'll be right back with some more examples from history. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're going back and we're looking at cases in history where terror attacks were not as they were presented to you. And back in 1976, there was a hijacking of an aircraft that was diverted to the Entebbe airport in Uganda, and Idi Amin got involved to air his small grandeur, and it was resolved with a supposedly daring raid by Israel, which they even made into a movie, the raid on Entebbe, and Charles Bronson's out there looking heroic, and the Israelis look good, and oh, those mean old Palestinians, how bad they are. British intelligence actually released some documents not too long ago that said that Israel actually set the hijacking up with Shin Bet infiltrators into the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And it was done with one simple agenda: make the Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims look bad, make the Israelis look good, to give Israel political room to go on grabbing pieces of other people's countries and dispossessing the Palestinians of their homes. That's been the agenda all along. Make the Palestinians look bad by hook or by crook so that Israel can, with the blessing of the rest of the world, take their land away from them. Now, of course, a very famous case of Israel doing this, and one that they botched, was the Lavon affair. This was back in 1954 in Egypt, where Israeli agents were planting bombs in buildings, including a United States diplomatic facility, and planted evidence framing Egyptian Muslims as the culprit. It's, again, make the Muslims look bad, make, Israel everybody's friend and so forth. And the plot failed because one of the bombs detonated prematurely, and the Egyptian authorities captured the bomber, who turned out to be an Israeli agent who led them to round up the rest of the Israeli spy ring operating in Egypt. And some of these were Israeli nationals, others were Zionim recruited from the local Jewish population. And of course Israel said, oh, it's a hoax, it's the anti-Semites. And then finally they were forced to admit that, yeah, you caught us, we were blowing things up and framing the Muslims, and we promise we won't do it again. And of course there was Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And as Israel was attacking and trying to sink the USS Liberty, Israel was out there screaming, the Egyptians are doing it, the Egyptians are doing it, go bomb them, hurt them. And there was a nuclear-armed strike in preparation for an attack on Cairo when the crew of the USS Liberty finally got a radio message out saying, hey, these are Israelis that are attacking us. And then, of course, everybody went back to, oh, the weather was cloudy, it was foggy, nobody could see anything. And, of course, it was just more of that same nonsense. So, we're seeing all these stories here that just don't seem to make a lot of sense. Israeli assets, all of the Israelis are safely removed. Israeli troops are on the ground. They're taking control of the situation. They're trying to control the outcome. They're trying to make sure that nobody leaves that mall alive who might contradict the official story. And the very nature of this attack, where they're going in there screaming, we only want to kill non-Muslims, it's like they're playing to newspaper headlines. So that Washington can say, see, we need to attack Kenya now. Interesting story broke just before we went to air here, where supposedly the leader of this raid has been identified as a British national. She's nicknamed the White Widow. She came into being following the London 772 bombing, which we know was another false flag hoax. And supposedly this woman, Samantha Luthwaite, there's a Muslim-sounding name for you, has become a terrorist to avenge her husband who was killed in this this false flag bombing. So let's see. Story coming out of Democracy Now, quoting an article out of Christian Science Monitor, saying that this idea that this Al-Ittihad was behind the bombing doesn't really add up, because they're not known for blowing themselves up. The facts aren't lining up. And this Al-Ittihad has not actually carried out any terror attacks since 1997. And they've never targeted Western powers, the U.S. or its allies. So even over at the Christian Science Monitor, the official frame-up is already crumbling apart here. Story coming out of antiwar.com identifying 6 Americans among the Nairobi mall attackers. And it starts out saying that Al-Shabaab, which, by the way, is a generic word meaning young people, just like up in Afghanistan, the Taliban, the evil Taliban. Well, Taliban simply means students. It's not an organization. It's a social category. These are students. Al-Shabaab means young people, young, unmarried, just living their lives. It's not an organized group. But supposedly this Al-Shabaab, or somebody claiming to be their spokesman, released the names of the attackers at this mall. And the names included 6 Americans, 2 from Minnesota, 1 from Kansas City, 1 from Maine, Illinois, and Arizona. Now, why on earth would Al-Shabaab release the names of the attackers? Unless they're playing to the propaganda headlines here. I mean, after all, did Al-Qaeda release the names of the 9/11 hijackers? This is feeling like a propaganda run-up. And if you look at statements made by Representative Peter King over the weekend, where he's saying, oh, the threat is here in America, they came from America. Even before this supposed Al-Shabaab announcement, Peter King was saying, oh, yes, we know at least 50 of these attackers came from the United States. They're already selling terror threat here in the United States of America. This is feeling like a prequel to a major false flag attack here in the U.S. Remember, again, the U.S. Embassy in Kenya was bombed just weeks before 9/11. To sort of plant the idea, terror, Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda. And we've all been hearing about these preparations for some kind of a major FEMA operation in Region 3, the first part of October. So, just goes on here. Let's see. Yeah, New York Representative Peter King, terrorist group recruited Somali Americans. And again, going back to 9/11, remember before the buildings had even collapsed, all the corporate media was saying, oh yes, it's Osama bin Laden, it's Al-Qaeda, it's Osama bin Laden, just pounding on that thing. And Representative King is out there over the weekend saying they recruited Somali Americans. He couldn't actually know unless he's following a script. So this is already feeling like a false flag run-up on this whole situation. Let's see. Now, for those who believe the official story, that this is a bunch of Somalis who attacked Kenya because Kenya's been attacking Somalia, if that's true, the blame rests right on the United States AFRICOM collaboration because the U.S. encouraged Kenya to attack Somalia. So if you believe the official story, this is not an attack, it's a reprisal for a U.S.-backed invasion of their territory. Oh, my goodness here. By the way, little side note, just in case you were wondering, apparently Kenya just recently discovered major oil deposits in their Turkana region. So, of course, the United States must intervene to save all that Kenyan oil from those evil terrorists here. More alarming, though, is a statement that was made by former U.S. Army General, Vice Chief of Staff General Peter Chiarelli, who said that their U.S. is already planning targets for military strikes in Kenya and adjoining African countries in order to target the militants involved in Sunday's deadly attack on the shopping mall. Well, if Peter King is right, and they came from the United States, is the U.S. going to start drone striking the United States of America?